Hello.
Hello,
Could you say your name, please?
Dư Thị Oan Chang.
And to begin with, can you take us back to 1975, before the end of the war? Could you describe for us your life at that time?
Well, since I was born in 1972, I was 3 years old at the time. My father, who was a political prisoner, he returned from, I think he was jailed for about 7 years. So my sister and I are post jail babies. So my sister was born in 1971. So my dad would only have been back from the internment camp for about 3, 4 years. So I think life was hard at the time. My mom, while my dad was in jail, struggled on her own to take care of my three older brothers. And then, of course, came my sister and myself. So I believe in 1975, from what she told me, life was getting better. It was getting better, but nevertheless, um, we were living, all seven of us, in a little, I would say, 1 or 2 rooms on the main floor of a two-story building that was owned by my uncle at the time. And I believe there are about 6 or 7 rooms, and other families were also living there.
And where were you living?
In Namding,
Namdin
Haiphong.
is in the north,
Yes, in the north,
in the countryside in the north.
in the countryside.
And
Yes,
so you were living under the communist regime at the time when the war was going on.
absolutely.
Your father had been jailed for about 7 years before you were born.
Yes,
What was he jailed for?
writing anti-communist poetry. So my brother grew up while he was in jail being called a traitor. So there was a lot of things that, obviously, a lot of harassment and issues that were there. I was only luckily 3 years old at the time, so I didn't face too much of that. But they became tough, so they had to hold their own in the streets.
What was your father's name, or did he have a pen name?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure what his pen name is, but his name is Zhu Guok Tui.
And when he was jailed, how difficult did that make your life?
Well, when he was jailed, I wasn't born, but what my mother had to do, from what I understand, was that she had three younger sons. My youngest, third oldest brother, he was only several months old, so she had to leave him with her parents, so she can raise enough money and funds to find a home for my other two brothers. So he spent maybe the first year of his life with my grandparents, and then once she was able to establish herself, she came and brought him back. I think he was in another smaller village. So that kind of impacted me in the way of which, when I was growing up, even at 3 years old, there was always this sense of needing to survive, right? So this need for survival. So I think at the time in 1975, we were seeing a little bit of silver lining over the horizon, but I think there was still always a sense of, things could go wrong at any time.
And before we continue on to 1975, when your father was in jail again, what did your mother do for an income?
Oh, so my mother, so my dad, the way they met was when his parents are from China, and they would import, export certain type of herbal medicine, and my mom would actually sell it in the market. So my dad, by trade, was a poet and also a herbalist. So he would, I'm not sure, maybe write prescriptions for people and implement them and diagnose them. And my mom would actually sell the medications or the herbs in the market. I believe after my dad was jailed, she again tried to continue with that. So she had a lot of network of women at the market that she knew, and so they assisted her in selling certain herbal medicines.
And she left your oldest brother with
My youngest brother.
oh, your
My
youngest brother.
third
But
youngest.
the two older brothers. You said that she needed to place them somewhere else as well?
No, she brought them with her, but she couldn't take care of a 2-month-old and feed him while going to the market every day. So my two oldest brothers learned, to do all of the domestic duties, and she would come home, with food. So she had to give up, I guess, parenting my youngest brother, my third oldest brother, for a while, just until she could catch up and have a place for all three of them.
And you said that you lived with your when you were born, when your other sister was born. Your family was living with your uncle.
Yes, because after my dad got jailed, our property got confiscated, and so my mom's older brother let us live with him. And he was the principal of a school, so luckily for us, my brothers were able to continue with their education, notwithstanding my dad was in jail.
And then, did your dad was he able to earn a living when he got out?
Yes, so they try to continue on doing what they did. Because he was branded a traitor, he would do most of the stuff at home. So he would dry the herbs, and do all of that, and maybe some kind of diagnosis. But my mom would have the front, right? So she would be the one in the market doing the selling. And only after she's made the sale do the people go to our house to pick up the herbal medicine.
And by 1975, your family was a family of 5 children,
Yes, yes.
and you were the youngest one.
I was the youngest, yes.
So you were talking about a silver lining at the end of in 1975. Where did that come from?
Well, my mom, it's actually anecdotal. My mom always called me the lucky child. So it doesn't matter what my life holds, I will always be lucky, and so I shouldn't worry too much. And she trusted me that I will do well. So she always went to a fortune teller every time the children were born. Apparently, the combination of when I was born, the species that I am in the zodiac calendar, time, date, a bunch of things says I'm lucky. So she claimed that by the time I was born, which is November of 1972, business got better, and they started accumulating, a bit more food. They were able to more furniture. Life got a bit easier. So it's clearly anecdotal. They seem to indicate that after I was born, good things started happening. So, and that's why they were able to accumulate the funds to eventually pay for our passage to Hong Kong.
And before that, did the end of the war bring about any changes to your life?
No, amazingly no, because my dad was already branded a traitor. It did make much of a difference to our life, right? The people who disliked us continued to dislike us, and the people who supported us just continued to support us.
Did it bring about any changes around you?
I believe my uncle, on my mom's side, both uncles, one was, I think, at one point in time, maybe 10 years ago, he was the Deputy Minister of Agriculture. So strangely, my dad's family was, the Chinese rebel political prisoner. My mom's side was the good government servant. So strangely enough, the government servant side of our family prospered a little bit better. They were doing a little bit better. They were being acknowledged a little bit more for their contributions, and they were getting a little bit more status, in whatever regime they had going on. So they were able to support us.
Pretty much everybody else that we've spoken with for this project, they were in the South when April 30th, 1975 happened and made things for the worse. For the people in the North, I guess that was the end of the war, the end of sending your sons off to the battlefield. Could you describe the mood of the time in all around you?
Well, it'd be anecdotal, but from what I understand was, even though it was the end of the war, things that people don't think about are buried bombs. So one of my uncles got married right at the end of the war. And I remember stories saying that the proceedings, everyone says, well, hurry up, because I think we're on top of a uncovered bomb, right? So that was always the family joke, that his marriage was explosive. So I think it's probably more in theory than in real life. Sure, if you had children who were soldiers, of course. My family, because my dad was a Chinese merchant. My brothers, I'm actually a Chinese citizen, right? My mom was a Vietnamese citizen, but because of my dad, we were, I guess, multinational. We were both Vietnamese and Chinese citizens, but we couldn't be drafted for war, and so that in that sense, it didn't make a huge difference to us. But on my mom's side of the family, because they were well educated, they weren't drafted for war either. There were some, I believe, resentment from the soldiers who came back, right? Of us just being able to live there, although my dad did go to jail, and enjoying the fruits of their sacrifice. So I believe that at the time, the end of the war, there was just like any kind of end of the war, there would have been some of, what is my duty, what are my jobs, and what can I do? So I believe that in 1975, my mom said, with the soldiers returning, there would seem to be a little bit more of maybe taking people to task for being anti-communist. So I believe that my mom had indicated my dad actually became a marker. There were now more soldiers, more individuals, so they didn't like to see, especially a traitor, thrive.
Most of the people in this interview projects were in the South when the war ended, and so they would talk about um, things changing for the worse at, at the end of at the end of the war. You lived in the North. How did society, your neighborhoods change around you at the end of the war? How did the mood change?
Okay, well, at the time in 1975, I was 3 years old, so a lot of this is just from anecdotal, from family discussions. From what I understand, is that because we're in the North, there was, I guess, a sense of victory because we won in a national war, in a civil war. However, I believe the day to day life didn't change that much. The fact that there's no more fighting and it ceased fighting for a little while, you still have a lack of food. You have a whole bunch of soldiers that returned. And for my dad, who was a traitor, branded a traitor at the time, I believe there was a sense of resentment. People have sacrificed their sons and daughters for a cause, which my dad obviously thought, at least the way it was portrayed and the way it was applied, the communist regime, he wanted democracy and freedom of speech because he was a poet. So I believe for my family, our personal experience would be that it was worse for us. That there were a lot of people who were resentful, and perhaps because we were doing better in 1975, because my dad, I think, returned home maybe about 1970. So we had 5 years to kind of build up a bit more business. I think the soldiers that returned and the families that were there, they questioned why we were able to prosper, and probably thought that we prospered, as a sacrifice to them. So I believe in the North, maybe there was a sense of victory overall, but from our personal perspective, we didn't feel that at all.
So when did your family decide to leave?
I believe in 1978, already started the paperwork because my parents had many discussions. There were strategies of who should go, when, and how. And my mom, bless her, she said, no, I'm not leaving any of my children behind. So we're all going to go together. And that means 7 people. It means you need to have enough gold to buy passage for 7 people. So I believe it started all the way back in 1978, if not 75, of their desire to leave. But their ability to leave, selling all of it, getting the papers from the government officials allowing us to leave. We left in March of 1979.
So you were Chinese. You were Chinese, or half of your family was Chinese. Were you leaving under as part of this program that the government had to expel, to encourage the
Yes.
departure of Chinese?
So I believe what happened was that all Chinese citizens were given a choice. Either you get patriated, that means you will be a Vietnamese citizen, you will give up all your properties, and your children will be subject to drafting for wars. Because as you might be aware, in the past, if you're a Chinese citizen merchant living in Vietnam, you actually got a special situation. You remained a Chinese citizen, you got to keep your property, and your children were Chinese citizens, so they could not be drafted into the Vietnamese army. So I believe in 1979, with the Chinese Vietnam conflict, we were given a choice either to give up all of our property, which again they took in any event, right? It wasn't really a choice, but you get to return to China. You didn't have to escape Vietnam, but they gave you a choice to return to China, and that's what we opted for. So we actually had legal authorization to return. And in all honesty, my dad being a branded a communist traitor, I'm quite sure we were on their high list of people that they would recommend returning to China. So that was the, I guess, facade we provided, right? That we would just go to China. They weren't aware we were going to end up in the Western states.
And what was your means of departure?
Well, we had to travel all the way from Namdik to to the south, and then we traveled from a boat. No, I apologize. No, we traveled to Cat Ba, right? Yeah. So we traveled to yeah we got out of the north, right?
Cat Ba is in the north.
Yeah. So we ended up there. Yes. So I'm sorry. What is the mountain region they call it there? The beautiful caves and whatnot. Yeah, Halong Bay. Yes, that's where we went. We went to Halong Bay from the north, and we got onto a boat. And what happened was, because our boat were filled with well-to-do Chinese merchants, the boat was well equipped. The other type of people, I think, who are given permission to leave are prisoners, political prisoners. So my dad actually ended in two categories. They didn't have too much, so they were supposed to be our friend boat or our security guard, and they had a very bad boat, a very poorly made boat. So there were two boats traveling side by side, from what I understand.
So you were in a smaller boat?
We were in the bigger boat, and then there was a smaller boat.
Oh, okay.
Who accompanied us. I think their engine wasn't so good, but I believe either they claimed they knew the route to take, or somehow or another the captain of our boat was somehow associated with them and was getting extra money for them to be part of it. It was always a strange situation because a lot of the people who are going without government permission, they bought a supposed ticket, but they never knew if that came to fruition or not. Because sometimes you could buy something, show up on the day, and there's no boat waiting for you. So one of my uncles that happened to. He came to Canada after us, and 2 times he was ripped off. Yeah, so
And so he wasn't a Chinese. He was on your Vietnamese
No, he was
side.
on the Chinese side. He was my dad's younger brother.
And why did he not have the permission to leave?
Because he ran out of time. He was in 1985. I think they only left the window open maybe till about 81 or 82. The initial plan was that my grandfather and my dad and all 8 of his brothers and sisters, we would all build a big boat and leave together. Unfortunately, the in-laws at the time, they were doing well.
Your dad's side.
My dad's side. So because they were rich Chinese merchants, they married well. So they married Vietnamese women who had status and whatnot. Notwithstanding my dad being imprisoned, they were doing okay. And so at that time, they couldn't see the long haul, right? They were thinking about immediately, our life is good, let's not go. And then what happened was life got worse, and then they kept trying to escape. So we have a whole bunch of family all over the world who kept coming at later and later dates. We were we were the second family to leave of my dad's clan.
Tell me what you remember or what you were told about your departure.
Well, notwithstanding it was a better boat, we were all cramped. I believe 300 of us in a 60-foot boat. The other boat was even worse. At least we had, a basement of sorts, right, to cover from the rain. I think the boat accompanying us didn't have any of that, so they just suffered, out in the open. Um, the washroom situation, there was only one latrine. Unfortunately, depending on where the wind was blowing, the rest of the boat people would be able to smell it. And because of the lack of hygiene and the long hours, there were a lot of people with dysentery. So it wasn't good. I believe there were 2 deaths, and we just, wrapped them up and threw them. I think they were elderly, and they came as a family. So it wasn't great. As a young child, I just remember my mom did a lot of praying, right? So just her grabbing onto us. And I believe our worldly possessions were gold leaflets. And so my mom would wrap them around each of the child. So the theory is we would all have some. If we get kidnapped or something, or we get lost, at least we'll be able to survive, that anyone like me as a young child, at least I have some kind of monetary value, so someone might want to adopt me. So there was a lot of pre-planning, a lot of fear, a lot of, we need to do this to survive. So as a child, you're just traumatized by that. I don't think any of the point we thought it was fun or thrilling or exciting.
You were aware of what was going on?
Yes, because I just remember a huge sense of fear and not being able to do this and not being able to do that. And that kind of survivor mentality, it took us a long time, probably about 20 years to get over. We would react as a family to minor things as a crisis, right? We would all get hysterical about it. So it took us for the last 10, 15 years to enjoy the calmness, the peace of a Canadian society, but it's very hard to get over that when your entire childhood was just one big crisis.
And you left from Ha Long Bay, you were headed north towards...
To Guangzhou, and then we ended up in Kowloon. So I believe some of the people who were routed to China actually have family in China and wanted to return to China. Our family, we've been in Vietnam for so long, we didn't have any family members. So we moved on to Hong Kong. And we had an uncle who married a very rich concrete merchant's daughter. And so they actually flew from Vietnam, South Vietnam, to the U.S. So they made it there, and they actually set up a family. And they were...
As part of the same expulsion, they had permission to leave.
They had, yes. But they were from the South. So they left, and they were supposed to then sponsor us. So we actually had a plan, right? We were going to go to Hong Kong and get my uncle, who is in the U.S., to sponsor us.
And how long did the journey take?
Well, it's funny. I went back to Vietnam in 1995 before I went off to law school. And Ha Long Bay to even Hong Kong, I believe someone told me maybe, I don't know, a day or two. It took us 34 to 45 days. Yes, the person who claimed that he knows the way to get out got lost in all the small islands in the Ha Long Bay for many, many days. So it took us about maybe 20 days to get to Guangzhou. And then, what was it? The tide was too rough for our for us to actually get in on shore. So we had to pay, strange enough, with watches for fishermen to pull us in. So we were kind of out in the sea for a while just because we didn't have enough power, strength in our motor of our boat to actually fight the current to, moor the boat. So unfortunately, one of the things that happened is, it's not like today, right? You can't look them up to see if they actually have experience. So the two things about, trying to get out of Vietnam at that time was, one, is there a boat that actually exists that you're supposedly paying for? And secondly, does the captain even know where he's going?
Do you remember spending days upon days upon days, like seeing the same, mountains?
I remember, I couldn't remember that. I remember a lot of people yelling at the captain, going, "How come it's taking so long? Are you sure that isn't the same one?" And I think that by the end of yeah, the trip, they all confirmed that he didn't know what the hell he was doing, and we just kind of lucked out to end up. I think he had a sense of northeast, south, and west, but an actual route, no, no, it was pretty bad.
Because you can get lost in Halong Bay.
And we've heard stories about 30 days later, they end up in the shores back in where they started from, and they get jailed.
Of other
right?
boats, not
Of
yours.
other boats, yes, of being jailed. So we were quite concerned because there are people on the boats with us that did not have permission. So they were more concerned than we are. Although at that time, who knew, right? We had permission to leave. We end up going back. Is the government going to say, okay, leave again? Right? So we were all very, very concerned that we paid someone who claimed he knew the route and might or might not have known the route.
You probably didn't have that, as much rice and water as you needed for 30, 45 days.
Yes, so by the time we got to Guangzhou, yes, we had to resupply. So I remember my parents, maybe, I think it was my clothes. So they actually, bought me nice clothes and whatnot, in a package, and we had to sell a bunch of that there just to get extra food and supplies. And my dad had to give up his really nice watch that he liked because the fishermen said they wanted 10 watches.
So you guys all went on shore.
Yeah, we all went on shore. Yeah, my mom, I'm very proud of her, but my dad was like, well, we don't know. Maybe we should just send a son or two because if they don't survive, we'll still have a legacy. But I'm glad my mom said no. Either we all go or none of us go. So yes, all of us did everything together.
How long did you stay in Guangzhou?
Just for 5 days, right? I believe that was going to be the first stop anyways for people to come out. So I guess to Hong Kong, our boat was less full, right? Because there were people who actually stayed in China.
And how long did that take for you to get to Hong Kong?
I don't think that was so bad. I think that was maybe 10 or 15 days. Which shouldn't take that long, but I think our main problem was getting into the shores of Hong Kong, right? We had to get fishermen to pull us in, and then there was also, they didn't know if we were boat people versus, criminal situations. So yeah, we had a lot of that. I do remember my first memory of Hong Kong is my sister and I are cute little kids, and there was either British or Australian photographer, journalist. He came on the boat, and he thought, as a surprise to us, he will give us chocolate and pop. Having never eaten chocolate before or drank pop, I thought he was trying to poison me. So I did not enjoy that. So I always have a strange little query if there's pictures of, I remember Ching and I posed, right? We posed for a bunch of pictures, and he patted our heads and took a bunch of pictures and whatnot, and they gave us the chocolate and the pop. So I always wonder if our pictures are out there somewhere.
And you didn't enjoy the treats?
No, well, because, chocolate, it coats your tongue. Having never eaten that kind of sweet before, I thought, what is this? The texture wasn't good. And pop, as you know, the carbonation burns. So yes, I did not enjoy it at all. And now I love it. But
What were the conditions at the camp?
because we were waiting for my uncle to sponsor us, he did not want association with my dad. So he actually changed his last name to get out of the country. So he had authorization, but gotten by bribery as opposed to actual legal documentation. So he changed his last name to Nguyen, and our last name is Zhu. So we started when we were at the first refugee camp. It was very military. Then they were trying to figure out whether or not we were criminals or not, or we were trying to bring some kind of political or, a terrorist activity. So the first one was pretty hard. My third oldest brother, he's always been a little bit rebellious, but somehow or another they told him he had to walk straight, and he thought he could just walk on the side or something like that. And they had him, I think it was this position and on his knees for like 6 hours. Yes. So the first, I think, intake office was quite military. And then after, I believe maybe a day or two, they moved us to another refugee camp. And we stayed there for a while. But I think the third refugee camp, because my dad speaks Chinese and he's knowledgeable and well spoken and is able to read Chinese. He always was the camp leader, so, or the bunkhouse leader. So the officers there gave us a little bit more freedom, and so we were able to get day passes. So my brothers, when we were at the third refugee camp, worked various jobs to gather money to travel, to the U.S.
What were your memories of that?
Strangely happy ones. I have a cousin, I think I gave you a picture of her, who was half Japanese and half Caucasian. So she was a product of, some Vietnamese girl and some a Japanese, maybe woman and a probably American GI got together, and my great uncle adopted her. And he was very rich, and she was absolutely spoiled. She somehow or another came to the same refugee camp as us. And she's almost, the Elizabeth Taylor of our family. She married many, many times, and mostly for money. So when we were at the refugee camp, the soy sauce factory owner saw her, fell in love, and gave her an apartment for her son at the time. And so strangely enough, I had a great time at the third refugee camp because every weekend she would get day passes for us, and he had a car, so she would drive us around and we would have dim sum and watch movies. Yes, so in a very, very strange way, my last year at the refugee camp, from a childhood's point of view, was excellent. So it was kind of what I missed out on for the 2 years is schooling. Didn't have any schooling at the refugee camps, right? So, yeah, and because we were also, my dad was the camp group leader. My mom was very entrepreneurial, so she would make taza for us and for the officers, and they would pay her for the ingredients and whatnot, and she would make it so we would be able to eat it, and they would be able to eat it, and she would have days, day passes to go to the market and whatnot, and also saved a little bit of money there. So, yeah.
She wasn't paid in actual currency. She was paid in day passes.
Well, she got some currency because she would tell them how much the ingredients would cost, plus a little bit more. So they would give her the money. She would buy all the ingredients, make the taza, and they would have this big meal, and we'd also be able to enjoy it too. And, she would be able to keep whatever was left over from, the cost of it. So, and then when I was in Hong Kong, because I didn't speak Vietnamese that well, I apparently spoke Chinese perfectly. Unfortunately, when we came to Canada, I only spoke Chinese or English. So my mom said, no, I don't speak Chinese. So then we reverted to Vietnamese. So now my Chinese skill is poor, my Vietnamese skill is poor, my English skill is okay. So, yes. So in a strange way, in the beginning it was terrible. In the bunkers, I think my fear of mice probably came from that, because they were bunk beds, and it was 3 or 4 people to a bunk bed, and so each family had, 3 or 4 bunks associated with them. There were a lot of baby mice underneath the mattresses. It wasn't a good condition, right? So although in my childhood some of it was fun, I'm quite sure as an adult I would have been horrified by the living conditions.
And you said that your brothers were able to hold down a job to make some money?
Oh, yes. It was all illegal, of course. So they were able to do certain things. Their recollections were they would get day passes. So they would go out and work at a soy sauce factory just as a laborer. They would clean the Hong Kong buses, right? So they'd get paid per bus. So they would do that. A couple of times they even got to be extras on Chinese films, right? When they had the big army scene, get dressed up and you become part of the mob. So we did that. So even at that time in refugee camps, we were always saving money for the next step.
And you stayed there for 2 years.
Yes.
Well, during that time, how often did you see representatives from UNHCR or from any of the settlement countries, the the third countries?
Quite a bit. So we were lucky at the point that when we, in 81, the Western world opened its arms out to the refugee people. So unfortunately for us, none of that was palatable because we were still trying to get my uncle to sponsor us. Finally, when it was unfortunate that, I'm a lawyer, so were you lying then or are you lying now, right? Why is your last name different than your purported uncle? Oh, I'm sorry, he lied to the Vietnamese authorities to escape Vietnam, but now he's telling the truth, saying that he's your uncle.
So he does want to sponsor you.
He does, but he has a different last name, right? So it's very hard to overcome that. And then he also claimed he had no association. And when he came into the U.S., he said he has no other family members in Vietnam or any of those things, right? And so you're caught up in your web of deception. So I think by 81, we just gave up, right? So we thought Canada was a good place. We only heard tales about, we couldn't get into the U.S. Australia's where all the prisoners and convicts go from the old tales. England, I don't think was taking either. So Canada was kind of our system. What was attractive to us was my mom, because she's Buddhist, she didn't want, and one of entire line of my dad's family are Catholic. So when my great great aunt was ill, a Jesuit priest or some kind of missionary said, if I can save her, will her and the rest of her line convert to Catholicism. So somehow or another he was able to save her, and we have a whole line of Catholics down there. So my mom, with the communist regime being anti-communist, she wanted to keep, the communist regime being anti-Buddhist, she wanted to remain a Buddhist. So she did not want association or sponsorship from a church. My dad, because he was a political prisoner, didn't really trust governments and whatnot, right? So he didn't want sponsorship from that. So what we were able to do with the Canadian immigration program was that we were able to buy a spot on a chartered airplane to pay for our own immigration. It was a loan from the Canadian government that we would pay for our own flights.
But so you came over under neither of the other.
Well, I think my dad will admit that the Canadian government sponsored us, even though he says, well, we paid for our own, so it's not like they really sponsored us, but they absolutely did, right? We repaid the amount we owed for our flights here, but of course for the first year and whatnot, we relied on the Canadian government to give us housing.
Yep,
right?
and it was the government program.
It was under the government program, yes. My dad
refugee program.
The refugee program. My dad thought the repayment of it made him not liable to the government at all. The other countries did make you pay for their flights, so he thought, oh, they'll want something from me. But with the Canadian government, we're paying our own way. He felt, he was able to assert his voice. Although I don't think he appreciated it's a democratic country. He could have always asserted his voice, but he was scared.
And how was it decided where you would settle? Where in Canada you would settle?
We had no say in that. I think had we had family, it might have made a difference. We didn't have any family in Canada, so we ended up in Red Deer, Alberta.
And what did you know about Red Deer at the time?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So our first stop was Vancouver, just at the airport, and then we ended up at the Montreal Army Barracks, the intake center. And then a couple of days later, after we were outfitted with the right winter gear, because we came in March, we were sent to Red Deer.
Was it at Long Point, the military base in Montreal? Was that where you found out that you would be sent to Red Deer?
Yes. So it was at the intake center, and we don't know what formula ended up with us in Red Deer, but we didn't have any family association, so I guess it didn't matter where we went.
That's how you found out?
Yes.
What did you think of Red Deer?
Didn't have a Chinese grocery place, so my dad, we made our own tofu for a while, which is very tough process. We made our own bean sprouts, right? And so once we finally found a friend who actually drove, we were able to go to Calgary for grocery shopping, but The hardest thing is the cultural lack of Asian culture there. So we didn't have any familiar foods or really many Vietnamese people. So no Asian grocery stores. Yeah.
And did anybody help you in your first days and weeks in Red Deer?
Yes, I think his name might be Pierre Boutin. And we were given a French speaking individual because my dad spoke French. And he was great. They, somehow or another, we were surprised to Red Deer because they didn't have any housing waiting for us. So we stayed at the Buffalo Motel for about 3 weeks. So we brought our own rice cooker. So that poor hotel, we tried to cook on our own in our hotel room with rice and dried squid, which we did. What did we do I think even in the refugee camp, if you have a light bulb, right, hot light bulb, you could put the dried squid over top and cook it that way. So yes, and we cooked some rice. And then I think in about 3 weeks we ended up living at a duplex, which we liked very much. Yeah, and my sister and brothers, we all attended English as a second language in the Red Deer Center Elementary Junior High.
How old were you at that time?
7.
And how old were your other siblings?
My sister was 9. Because there's about a 10-year gap. My brothers were 18, 20, and 22.
Did those guys get schooling?
Yeah, we all learned the same ESL. Apparently, I'm a better student than them at 7 years old. And then they ended up, my oldest brother, he's quite impressive. He tried to study the Vietnamese English dictionary while we're in the Hong Kong refugee camp. And in the first year we're here, he just went to Red Deer College. Now he has a PhD in computing science. My third oldest brother and my second oldest brother went to Lindsay Thurber High School. So we all spent 1 year ESL. And then the next year we went into schooling. Yeah.
And what about your parents? What kind of work did they find?
My dad worked at a LePage cleaning. So he actually operated the machines that would dry clean clothing. And my mom initially worked there as a seamstress. And then she got moved out of that job and to, I don't know if you know the Bay, they used to have a downtown Red Deer, they used to have a cafeteria. And so she would clean tables and whatnot there. And I love that she worked there because I would always get French fries and Jell-O after school.
And was it through government help that they found a job? Do you know?
Yes, absolutely. So they call it Manpower at that time. And so the lovely Vietnamese lady at Manpower there, she just kind of, introduced our family to different situations. And my oldest brother, he's a fixtures furniture. So he actually got a job there. And my other 2 brothers were dishwashers at various Chinese restaurants. Yeah, so, and Ching and I, we had paper routes. So our family was always, we got to continue to earn money because my dad was very well educated and there was no question that we would go to post-secondary education. So, and that's how we ended up moving to Edmonton. We were all going to go to university anyway, so we might as well move to a university town.
Oh, when was that?
That was when I was in grade 6. Because my oldest brother finished Red Deer College and then he moved to continue his computer science program, master's program at the U of A. And then my other brother, ended up engineering at the U of A. And my second oldest brother, who was never the academic one, he was going to be a chef and then ended up being an electrician.
And what line of work did your parents get into in a sustainable way?
My dad, because he's a Chinese herbalist, he actually became the Chinese herbalist for Lucky 97 for about 20 years there. And my mom, she, I think, worked a few more jobs doing cleaning hotel rooms. Yes, but I think my dad continued working till his 70s and my mom just stopped working in her 60s.
And your dad didn't have to retrain for that work?
No, not at all, because he continued doing the work in his little community, right? So his patients at Lucky 97, or at the time it was Dong Phuong, right? So they spoke Vietnamese or Chinese, and he was the herbalist. So he just continued what he was doing, but for that supermarket.
And you went to school and then became a lawyer.
Yes.
So, can is there a time, a moment in time when your family felt, well, you felt that you were at home in Canada and that you were settled in? It's a hard question to ask somebody who came as a child.
No, actually, I actually was doing an interview for someone else, and I said, I feel for the Indigenous people in Canada, right? Because this is their home. They feel disenfranchised. The Europeans came in and took over their country. I, luckily, and any other people, my parents at least felt like Vietnam was their home, right? They could be there. And just the way we were raised, I probably did feel like I was a part of the Canadian mosaic, having all the full freedoms and full rights, probably into my 30s, until I became a lawyer for about 5-6 years. And I call it my cultural schizophrenia. So, for example, I'm very Western, and I don't think I could ever marry a traditional Vietnamese man. I just have too strong of a personality and all of that. At least I think so. But I also have very Vietnamese cultural beliefs. So if my friends coming over, I always say, no, you got to go to my parents and say hi to them, right? You can't just go into the house, right? Or if I have friends that are a guy, I said, no, you can't come to the basement because that's where my bedroom is, right? So I don't feel like, until I had my own children and I see life through their view, that I think I felt like this is my country. This is where I belong. This is where my roots are, right? Because there's always that mythical Vietnam that my mom and dad keep talking about, which I don't know either. So I was kind of lost for a while that, I am Western country doing Western things, but then I have this cultural limitation, of who I really am. So I think probably once I had the children and I saw life through their view, I felt like this is my country.
And if you can look back to the early years, what were some of the obstacles and struggles that your family faced?
Well, from a very materialistic point of view, we were 7 people living in a 3-bedroom house, which is fine. And I think our total income at the time was $600. So I don't even know how my parents did that. One of the things that we never got were the extras, right? So, for example, the lovely people when I was in Red Deer would say, oh, please, here's free tickets to the circus. Why doesn't Ching and Chang come? We'll even drive them. Well, I can get into the circus, but I have no spending money, right? So it's like you're able to join the event, but you can't really enjoy it. So I think that was one of the obstacles. And then also as a teenager, you want to save face, right? I would say no to certain things just because I would say, oh no, I don't want to go skiing. That's lame. But the reality is I don't have any money to do so. And so one of the things that we learned as Ching and I was that my parents would never be in a situation to give us any money. So if we wanted anything, we would have to do it ourselves, which is a good life skill. But one of the obstacles is if you really want to be integrated into a country, you have to feel like you belong. And a lot of my nieces and nephews and my sons have a lot of freedom that they're not even aware of. Just the freedom not to care about, can we afford this? And there was times where we didn't think we had enough money to do this or that or the other. And as a 10-year-old, I worried, right? When my mom says, oh, we're not even have enough money to eat this month. I don't know, is she exaggerating or do we not have enough money to eat this month, right? So those are also concerns. And then there were other issues of my parents as they're making their own money and not having enough. They became, I think, a little bit aggressive in holding on to each of their little teeny tiny little money that they have. And I felt that, that is something that I wouldn't want to do. Because, a family, you share everything. But I think just because you have so little of it, you're kind of concerned that the other person isn't spending it wisely. So then you start hoarding it. So I always grew up in real sense that I needed to hoard everything, right? Because there might not be enough to live on. So I think that was probably one of the largest obstacles, to see it all there, but not to be really part of it or enjoy it. I think that's probably one of the largest obstacles, probably for any immigrant.
And what helped you in your integration?
Conscious decision that I have to succeed in this country. So very, very early on, we made a conscious decision that we will be immersed in the English language. At least the children are going to be, and we will speak English at home, and we will speak English in school, and we will work very hard at our education. Unfortunately, the sacrifice for that is we lose certain Vietnamese traditions, we lose the language skills in Vietnamese, and we lose maybe a connection with our parents because our English skills aren't so great. Probably more my sister and I than my brothers, right? What we gained was, not having an accent, being in a profession that relies on English, right? So my sister's a banker, I'm a lawyer, and a lot of immigrants aren't able to survive in the legal atmosphere just because, I didn't grow up with English, right? English is my second language, so if you have to be really immersed in that to succeed.
So you tie your loss of the Vietnamese language with the desire to succeed, with the desire to succeed.
Yes, it's called assimilation. Like we had to assimilate to the culture, to understand it, to be a part of it. Maybe less so now. Now they have Google Translate, so maybe that would be easier. But, in the 80s, right, unless you speak English, unless you do it well, you're not going to succeed. Even in school, right? Writing skills, communication skills, whether you get an A or a B, it matters how the teachers perceive you.
So you made a decision to drop Vietnamese speaking at home in order to learn English faster?
Yes.
Is that the thinking?
Yes. And we would watch English programs, read English books, debate in English. So yes.
And talk to each other in English.
Talk to each other in English, yes. My poor mother sometimes would get heated debates and she would say, I don't even know what you're saying. What are you yelling at? And I try to interpret it for her. Everyone's interpretation is is what they believe to be accurate. So yes, I felt bad that we were alienating our parents, right? So that was the sacrifice we made. I don't know, maybe we could have done it without doing that, but that was the only way we thought we could.
And was that a family decision? Was that your own? Was that a spoken decision? A shared decision?
Yes, I think so, because my oldest brother started learning the Vietnamese English dictionary while he was in Hong Kong, right? And he was already in university, and he kept saying, mathematically I could, probably outthink anyone there, but can I write it? How do I write my thesis? It's in English, right? So it's mathematical calculations with a whole bunch of English. So he was struggling pretty hard, right? So he was getting tutoring in English, notwithstanding he's a PhD candidate. So he always emphasized to us the need to really learn the language skills.
But to speak to English to each other.
Absolutely.
And drop Vietnamese.
We speak Vietnamese to our mom and dad, but to each other, yeah, still to this day, yeah, the debates are still in English. Yeah. And I think I don't know, do you think in Vietnamese or English? I think in English because my Vietnamese skills are poor. So that's how you know which language is predominant.
40 years later, how do you feel about the life that you and your family have made here in Canada?
Gratitude. We are very grateful to this country, notwithstanding a lot of people helped us get where we are today. Of course, there's a lot of tenacity on our own part, but the amount of support, acceptance from the individuals here, I don't think and it's not that it's a cultural thing, but I think something that people don't understand about Canada is the unspoken politeness. We say sorry for everything, and we are not too strict. At least the people aren't so stuck in our ways, right? We're able to, I think, assimilate or at least look at someone else's perspective. We may not agree with them, but we can at least appreciate what their perspective is, and that's what I've found a lot of people have done for me. And I think one of the things that also helped me is a bit of audacity. So I have this story I'm going to tell you. When we first moved to our house in Red Deer, our second house, and I hope this isn't inappropriate. So my sister and I are there. We're joining the playground, and we did not know the word chink. It's a derogatory term for a Chinese person. So the kids there were yelling, chink, 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 chink. And I thought, oh, ching, they're calling us. So we just went and played with them. And they just played with us, right? Because we didn't even know we were being mocked. We didn't act it like we were mocked. And then my sister met up with this really popular girl named Ginger, and she ran the school, right? So, sometimes it's audacity. So that taught me something, right? And when I first started at my law firm, I was the only first non-white person at McLennan Ross down in 99, much less a female Asian. The way my name reads, they think I'm a man. Maybe I write in a very succinct way, so they think I was a guy. So they were super happy to get a ethnic female. So I was in all of their brochures. But even then, I always acted like me, right? And after a while, they just got used to it, right? Because whatever prejudices or perspective they have, I even have people, it seems politically inappropriate here, but some people say, wow, you are so not the kind of person I thought would be an Asian. I don't know what that means, but I just take it to mean that I'm just me, right? So I think a lot of ours is the kindness in others and just the audacity not to prejudice them, to have our preconceptions, and then once they get to know you, their preconceptions are broken. And I think that's probably like any other culture, right? You can only have prejudice against someone you don't know, right? And once you get to know them, it's very difficult, to categorize this person that you actually like. Yeah, so I think that our experience here is just a bunch of gratitude for the kindness of the people we've met along the way.
And do you talk about your experiences with the younger generation?
Yes, I share my experience with everyone. My children actually mock me. Because when I meet people and they say, oh, where are you from, this and that, I tell them I'm a boat person and this and that and the other. And even my nieces, right? Auntie Chang, do you have to tell everyone that? I said, why would I? And so, so I am embarrassingly open about my background, where I come from, and quite a bit of pride in that.
And what do you think that the younger generation and your children and other people's children, what can they learn from your experiences?
Strangely enough, they are so forward thinking that they don't think prejudice exists. They don't think any of those things exist. And I think what they can learn is that how far we've come from where we are, right? For them, I'm just mom. I've always been Western. I've always done this and I've always done that. Although I'm way stricter than my husband, so maybe they do notice that. But I think the younger generation is just overcoming difficulties, right? And how you can come on the other side of it, still loving life and being grateful. So I think the younger generation, I think they learn, and I think sometimes they actually appreciate that of, Mom, were you actually living in a little hut? So Mom, you didn't have shoes? So Mom, you didn't go to school for 2 years? That seems weird. Mom, you were in a refugee camp and Uncle Von had to do this for 6 hours? So them, it's a little unreal for them, but I think in their quiet moments, they are a bit in awe and appreciative of that. But they're teenagers. They mock me.
And what are your thoughts about Canada's humanitarian reaction to the refugee crisis?
Wow. I think they were a leader in that. I think they're still a leader in that. In any kind of crisis, either you could face it with fear or you can embrace it with hope. And I believe that Canada embraced the crisis with hope, that they think they gave at least my family the benefit of the doubt that we came from a place and we want a better life and that we want to contribute to the Canadian society. And my mom, she's so cute. She felt that very, very closely. So every year, until her death, I think in 2003, she would always ask me for a tally. So Chang, your husband and you and Ching and her husband and all my kids, do you think you pay enough in taxes to pay back all the money that we ever borrowed from the government? And I said, yes, Mom. Kevin and I pay more taxes than you've ever got from the government. So we have contributed way more than we've ever taken. And she's like, yeah, good. I like to hold my head high and know that. So yes, my mom is a businesswoman. So she thought of us coming here and using, and benefiting from the social services. She wanted us to be productive members of society, to pay it back, plus. So I always gave her the end of the year report. I said, yes, Mom, we're probably, I don't know, $1 million more in taxes than we ever took. Oh, good, that's good. I'll tell my friends that we're not like, one of the people who just takes and take, that we're one of the stories where we gave back. It's ironic that I'm a tax lawyer now. So I think that's part of it, where our experience.
Thank you very much for sharing your stories with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're very honored to have you on board.